Hey there and welcome. My name is Pete, and as I have announced in the latest channel update video, last weekend we had ourselves a small AMA or Q&A over on the Pete Complete Discord for my Patreon supporters. However, since it is very important to me that Patreon remains a place for you to support me and not for me to lock content away from you, we did record the entire thing. What you are about to listen to is therefore the slightly edited version of that AMA, but don't worry, I did not cut out any questions or answers, just some ums and pauses and sections where we talked over each other, as I did have the pleasure to do the AMA together with SquaredCubed, who is one of the longtime supporters of this channel and one of the driving figures behind me setting up the Discord, and who was nice enough to agree to co-host this AMA and ask the questions that the community provided. And I think that is basically all of the background info that you need. Be warned, I might sound a little differently than what you're used to, as this is actually the first time that the channel features live audio of myself, which is obviously not going to be as polished as my regular commentary. With that being said, I still hope that you enjoy the next 1.5 hours or so, and if you do, then well, you know how things go, leave a thumbs up to make me happy. And that is all I wanted to say here, so let's jump in now and listen to SquaredCubed and Pete Complete. So since I'm the guy with the intro, maybe I should say a few words as we get started here. So thanks to everyone who is participating live in the AMA voice channel here. We will probably have a few more people join us over the next few minutes. First of all, thank you so much to SquaredCubed for hosting or co-hosting this AMA. We talked a bit about this beforehand because for those of you who were part of the last AMA, which I'm honestly not quite sure when that was, a year or two ago.
I'm fuzzy on that one too.
It was interesting because it was basically me talking to a muted chat for 2 hours. And we decided that maybe to give myself a bit of a moment to catch my breath, drink something, and to have the entire thing feel a bit more natural, we do, something like a co-hosted podcast, if you will. So SquaredCubed was nice enough to agree to host this thing with me, ask the questions, ask follow-up questions, interrupt me if I'm going off on a tangent, and so that I don't have to talk for 2 hours or however long this AMA is going to last. And I think that is a good thing. And thank you very much for that.
Not a problem. The last one definitely went a lot longer than anyone was expecting. I remember being on Discord mobile while it was happening. I was just like, my phone's about to die. So maybe we'll have a way of wrapping things up a little more professionally this time, hopefully. And I'm not even able to count all the people that are in here now, but this is definitely more than we had last time, which is fantastic.
And again, for those of you who might not be able to be with us for the entirety of the AMA, don't worry. We are recording this. We just practiced clapping to synchronize our audio waves. And we will upload the entire thing to YouTube over the Christmas days. So in a week or so, you will be able to get this entire thing on YouTube, depending on how long it's going to be, maybe as a two-parter. But you will not miss out on anything.
I definitely need more practice in the clapping department, as I messed up my audio 3 times here, and finally we got this thing working on my end. But why don't we go ahead and kick things off with a question? And I think what we'll do first is we'll pull from some of the questions we had beforehand and start things out easy, which is one of my favorite questions that someone asked. I really like all these questions that aren't necessarily about YouTube, but more interesting stuff like, what is your favorite book? That's one that Kitty asked.
Yeah, I saw that.
I think that's a fantastic question.
Definitely. And while you're on the topic of questions that do not relate to the YouTube channel, I would love to not talk about my YouTube channel for the next 90 to 120 minutes. So if you have anything that you want to ask about me, I would very much appreciate questions like that as well. So regarding the question what my favorite book is, I thought a bit about that. And I think one of my all-time favorite books is the Artemis Fowl series. I'm not quite sure if many people are familiar with that. It's by an Irish author.
You know, that was a big series in the US. A lot of kids like that series in the US.
Yeah, in Germany as well. So it was one of my favorite children's books, as it is a children's book. But I think it is one of those children's books that really holds up well for adults as well. I think I listened to the entire series on audiobook a few years back, and I was surprised how good they are still. More recently, I'm a big fan of the Loch Lamora series by Scott Lynch. It's a fantasy series. It is supposed to be a 7-part series. The 3rd book has been out for more than 5 years now, and the 4th is nowhere to be seen. So I have slowly but steadily given up hope that that series will ever reach its end.
A little bit of Game of Thrones syndrome where no one thinks the book is going to finally come out.
Exactly. Other than that, an author who publishes a bit more regularly is Joe Abercrombie, also a fantasy author, so you might see a bit of a trend going on there. The first Law series especially, one of those books that is made even better by the audiobook version. So I highly recommend listening to that. I think it's on Audible and many other platforms as well. It's narrated by, I believe, Stephen Pacey, he's called. And there is one character in the first book who, I don't want to spoil anything, but he gives that character a very unique voice. And it's one of those cases where a good book is made even better by the voice acting of the narrator.
I got a follow-up question to Kitty's. So you mentioned Audible, and I listen to a lot of books on Audible, but also when it comes to like my favorite book series, specifically my favorite book series is by Clive Cussler, who actually just passed away this year, unfortunately. But he has a series called The Pneuma Files, and that series I refuse to listen to or do digital. I only read those books like physical copies. I get a hardback copy and I read it that way. Are you like a audiobook only kind of guy, or do you like to have a physical copy in your hands when you're reading certain series?
I would love to have more physical copies in my hand, to be perfectly honest. No, I unfortunately become more and more of an audiobook guy because it is just easier to listen to. Like if you fall asleep, if you drive, if you cook, if you do something else that does not allow you to read, an audiobook is a great way to consume a book, if you will, without having to physically read it. But I would love to do more reading, especially as a kid. I remember reading a whole lot, and that has unfortunately not been the case in recent years.
I use Audible for when I'm going, like driving to and from work. That's when I use the audiobooks. And then on vacation, that's when I'm finally able to get a book in my hand, free time. That's the only time I'm able to do physical copies. But that's a fleeting dream, so to speak, nowadays. Not much free time, especially with the way the world has changed over the past, well, I guess it's like 2 years now, huh? Sort of in the same vein, I don't know if this is too personal, but Steak was asking if, on the topic of reading, do you use glasses, like reading glasses?
No, I don't. I think at one point I probably will. Looking at my family, everyone who's like a few years older than me is wearing glasses, so sooner or later I will probably have to as well, especially considering that I'm spending 12 to 14 hours every day staring at a screen. But for now...
Yeah, I've written it off. I know I'm going to need glasses eventually. I spend my every waking minute of my life is spent looking at a computer screen, but that's the nature of the job.
Yeah, eventually I'm afraid I won't get around it.
So, there was something that Unexpected Giraffe had asked that I actually... I already know the answer if I were going to answer this, but I'd be very interested to see what you would say, which is if you could erase your memory of one game just so you could experience it again for the first time, what would it be and why?
That question, I saw that briefly, and without even thinking about it, my first answer was Skyrim, because that was probably the game over the last 10 to 15 years that I was just completely blown away by when I first started that. It was my first proper Elder Scrolls game. I played a few hours of Oblivion, but it kind of came out before I really got in contact with the Elder Scrolls series. So that was my first experience with Elder Scrolls. And yeah, I don't know. I perfectly remember the moment when I first launched that game. And I would give a lot to be able to go back there and experience that first moment once more, because I have spent like hundreds of hours in Skyrim. I believe well over 1,000 hours at this point.
The first time I ever played Skyrim, I remember it perfectly. I didn't even own the game at the time. A friend of mine was a big Bethesda Elder Scrolls series fan, and I saw him playing it, and I was like, you can cast spells? What is this? I was like, this is everything I wanted. It's dragons, it's swords, it's magic, it's mages, it was vampires and all sorts of stuff. But it was awesome. And then I instantly went out and bought the game for like my Xbox or something.
Honestly, that first section after you escape Helgen, the walk over to Riverwood, that is, in my opinion, still one of the most well done walks or travel sequences in video games. It's so simple, it's so short, but it's beautiful. You get a very, very good first impression of what this world is. And yeah, I would give a lot to go back to that, to erase my memory and to experience all of that for the first time.
It's, Bugthesda has earned its nickname for a very good reason. I mean, they're very well known for pushing out games that rely on the modding community to come out with a mod to fix something that they weren't able to fix before the game went live. But Bethesda really does the immersion aspect of these open world games really, really well. I'm keeping my expectations low, but I'm looking forward to Starfield. I don't know if you have any desire to look at that, but it's the first original IP that Bethesda is going to release a game for in 25 years. So I'm interested to see how that plays out.
I'm keeping an eye on that. I don't want to say I have high hopes, because I have been disappointed with new releases over the last few years one too many times. I believe Cyberpunk was a very good recent example. But see them tackle that new setting, something that the Bethesda has not yet done, like tackle outer space or something more sci-fi-ish, except for like the 2 Alien DLCs, I believe, that exist for the Fallout games. That would be interesting to see, definitely. And could very well appear on the channel in some form or fashion, just like Skyrim or Fallout, perhaps. But we'll probably get to that in another question.
Well, that's probably my next question here for you, which is, now that you've mentioned Skyrim, everyone's got to know, do you think you'd ever 100% Skyrim?
Oh man, I would love to, honestly. I have that game on my list for a few years now. And like I said, I've spent countless hours just creating every possible character. I have done what probably every one of us has done, like create a new bot list, start a new character, abandon the entire thing after 20 hours, and then start fresh. And I would really love to. The only issue is, of course, that Skyrim and the Fallout series as well, the games are just so incredibly long, and 100%ing it seems almost impossible without dedicating several years of the channel to one of that series. I mean, look at the Mass Effect series. Mass Effect has quite literally been with the channel since day one, and we still haven't finished the third game. So of course there have been breaks in between, but just imagine what like a Fallout 4 or a Skyrim would do to the channel. I would really love to, but I haven't really found a way to do it, to be honest. So it would of course require a whole lot of editing, which I'm not so sure is suitable for a completionist series of that kind, because...
Well, it's also open world, which makes it that much more difficult, I could imagine. But it could be... I mean, it's such a loved game, so, I could see it either way. It's really, really fantastic.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, I'm not sure if we have people who follow Miniature Nerd over on YouTube. That's a YouTube channel I really like. He has just completed his Fallout series, and he has done a whole lot of editing, but that cuts out like 45 minutes worth of gameplay, traveling from A to B, cutting out fights, cutting out conversations, stuff like that. All of that is stuff that I don't want to do because I always want to bring the full experience if I play a game. I don't want people to miss out on conversations, on fights, on decisions, on all of that stuff. So, and keeping all of that in would inevitably lead to a series that is just incredibly long.
Well, so that sort of is a good way to bring up the second half of the question related to Skyrim, which was asked by LJ, which is, because it would require so much editing, would you consider streaming a 100% playthrough of Skyrim? Because, you can just keep the VODs and then people can watch the VODs. Yes, it's going to be, I can't even imagine how many hours it would be. Hundreds, thousands? I don't know. Doing a full completionist playthrough of Skyrim depends on how quick you want to be with it, but it almost lends itself to the idea of streaming it instead.
Absolutely, yes. I didn't want to touch on that because I knew that somebody asked that question, but yes, that would probably be the logical conclusion. And we have talked about streaming before, I think even in the last AMA. It's an interesting thing because from a strategic standpoint for the channel, streaming would no doubt benefit Pete Complete. I have received so many requests for stream or for games to stream in the past, and it would definitely be another way to interact with the community. That being said, a live stream is also pretty far removed from my current creation process. So for those of you who have watched the video that I put out in March, I believe, on the How I Make a Video, if you were watching me just play a Mass Effect episode or play a Rimworld episode, the amount of times I just tab in and out of the game, I just pause things, I look up things in the wiki, in Mass Effect, the amount of times I replay sections, I watch videos of other people, all of that goes into making an episode. And all of that would, of course, not be present in a live stream, which then would require a lot of preparation before the stream if I would want to 100% complete a game like Skyrim. Because despite the fact that I've played well over 1,000 hours, I do, of course, not know all the secrets. And for me, it would be one of the worst things to stream or to play a game and miss something. I think to this day, the worst comment you can give me on a video is, "Hey, Pete, you've missed something." So I would have to prepare a whole lot before a stream like that. And let's be real here, I would probably also be quite nervous because one of the reasons I do post commentary is to keep full control over what I say and how I say it. As you all know, I'm not a native speaker, even though the channel has definitely helped improve my English a lot. I still like that feeling of being able to re-record a line 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, however often I need to until it sounds just the way I want it to sound. And of course, with streaming, you don't have any of that. Definitely, it would get easier the more often you do it. That's the case with everything in life, I suppose. But again, the streaming process is pretty far removed from the way I currently do things, which is an additional hurdle for me to take, if you will. So I would really like to. I like the idea. It's one of those things where I say I like the idea of streaming, but I'm a little hesitant to actually do it.
Yeah, I know that makes sense because it's one thing to do a completionist playthrough of a game where you know every spot you need to check for metagel or whatever. It depends on the game, obviously. And then it's another thing to interact with Twitch chat or live chat on YouTube, whatever platform you choose to, I guess, rip Mixer. Mixer isn't around anymore, but it's one thing to 100% and be fact checking and double checking and triple checking, and then it's a whole other thing where you're playing, but you're also being somewhat casual because you're also talking to those who are watching, and they seem pretty different, but worth asking simply because a 100% Skyrim playthrough would probably be better suited to something that wouldn't require editing, like a stream. But speaking of Skyrim and whatnot, and you said you played 1,000 hours, do you like playing Skyrim with or without mods?
So Skyrim is one of those games where I very early on started to heavily get into the modding community. Naturally, there came a point where I was just unable to play the game without certain quality of life or visual mods, which is interesting because I have spent at least the same amount of hours in a game like Rimworld, where I still enjoy the game very much without mods, even though people have asked me to play with mods for years now. But that's another question. I would probably have to really restrict myself for a Skyrim playthrough to keep things mostly vanilla, because that is another thing I would like to offer, the ability for people to play along. And the more mods you have, of course, the more unique the experience that you offer becomes. But I also, for a completionist playthrough, don't want to stray away too much from what the game is intended to be played as, if you will.
Yeah, the original idea of the creator, so to speak.
Exactly. And that is one of, the things that I want to do with this channel, is show off games the way they were. I don't want to say meant to be played, but as close to the original experience as possible.
Yeah, get that true Todd Howard vision in there, right? Well, I guess that touches on another elephant in the room, so to speak, which is modded Rimworlds. You know that questions have been asked 1,000 times, but it did come up, and some of the questions submitted ahead of time.
Yeah, it definitely also comes up in pretty much every Rimworld video nowadays, which is fine. I mean, let's be honest, Rimworld is one of those games that is great on its own, but becomes so much more with mods, or becomes something entirely different with mods, if you want to go that way. So ideally, they don't release like 5 or 6 more expansions, like some people have rumored, because the channel would probably end up doing a series for each and every one of those. Unless the next expansion releases while I'm still in the middle of the current series, I would sooner or later definitely play Rimworld for every expansion or every DLC that is released. And I would like to experience new content without influencing it too much with things like mods. That being said, there are some amazing mods out there. I have actually not delved too deep into what mods can do with Rimworld, because as we all know, that can go pretty crazy pretty quickly, and very quickly you reach that point where you can't go back. And for the sake of the channel, I don't want to do that just yet. Still, I could see myself play a more heavily modded Rimworld series in the future, definitely. At the moment, we have, I think, 4 or 5 quality of life mods in all of the series, but nothing that is too noticeable, just a few visual things perhaps.
And nothing game-changing.
Absolutely not. No, some pathfinding things, stuff like that. But in the future, I would definitely be open to doing something that more heavily influences the theme of a playthrough, be that to go all into the futuristic archotech mechanoid stuff, or to go the other way, something that we kind of have in the current series, which is a little bit more tribal, Neolithic, or go into like medieval stuff, build a nice fortress, stuff like that. And there are, of course, mods for all of that, and mods for much crazier things. I would probably stay away from the total conversion mods, like I believe there is a Star Wars mod, a Lord of the Rings mod, stuff like that.
Gleason is saying, I don't know if this is a joke, but there's the Mass Effect overhaul mod for Rimworld.
Yeah, I've heard of that. That could be a nice crossover thing, but I'm not so sure if that really would be something that's interesting for like 50 or 60 episodes. Maybe for a shorter series, that could be an option. But again, I would have to look more heavily into what these individual mods can do. What I think is probably the most realistic solution would be to go with some of the vanilla expanded mods, which don't move the gameplay into an entirely different direction, but instead just expand on some of the vanilla mechanics. I think that would be something that is as close to the vanilla experience as possible, while still offering something new and not going completely off the rails. So that would probably be an option, yes.
So let's change direction here a little bit and move away from the YouTube discussions and get back to sort of in the same vein as what Kitty had asked with the same book, but just keep it lighthearted here, because Steak wants to know if you have a favorite flavor of ice cream and or sandwich. I don't know if he means ice cream sandwich or ice cream or a sandwich.
Honestly, you can never go wrong with the standard chocolate ice cream, which is a great ice cream to combine with all sorts of deliciousness. Like, I love chocolate ice cream with banana, for example. When I get myself an ice cream out in the streets or something, I usually try to experiment a bit with some of the more exotic flavors. Not quite sure if you would call them exotic, but stuff like melon, pineapple, that kind of thing. But when I buy myself ice cream in the store to eat at home, it's usually chocolate.
Chocolate is a time-tested favorite and classic. I'm a big fan of vanilla bean myself, although I was a chocolate guy when I was growing up. Now I feel that as I've gotten older, I'm like, vanilla, please.
I think you guys in the US have a bit more of an ice cream culture compared to Germany, to be honest.
Yeah. In the US, we got the fan favorite Ben and Jerry's ice cream, and they go all out with, just even like a classic chocolate, they go all out with. But then they also come out with like ridiculous flavors. Like, there's one named after the late night show host Stephen Colbert. They made an ice cream flavor for him, and they have American Dream Cone or something. It's like American Dream Cone. I think you're right on that. There's a serious obsession with I guess in America, a serious obsession with unhealthy food. But yeah. Oh, and Kitty's right. Just Bluebell. Bluebell, that's a classic, Kitty, but your true Texan is showing through, since that's a Texas ice cream there.
And Specs just mentioned the Smurf ice cream. We actually do have that here as well, but I have so far been very afraid to actually taste it because I have no idea what actually is inside of that.
Yeah, not really sure. I've never heard of that. Maybe I should try it? Report back.
I don't know.
I don't know what that would be. There was an odd question that I'm not really sure, but have you ever been in a cockpit of an airplane before?
Yes, actually. As a kid. Back then, when one could actually do stuff like that. So when we were flying with my parents, like going on holiday or stuff like that. Yeah, pre 9/11 exactly. My father often took me to the front and asked if I could see the cockpit. My only memories of an airplane cockpit are as a small child, just taking a look and being overwhelmed by all the technology.
So many switches, buttons, and dials. I remember back then you used to be able to take scissors on an airplane. I would as a kid, I would get sheets of paper folded up and cut out like snowflakes. Yeah, no scissors anymore. That's not happening anymore. But there was another question here that I kind of liked, just sort of lighthearted off the cuff. It came from, I'm going to mispronounce this, Romzetron, I think, who said that they couldn't decide on what to make for dinner today. But that brings us to their question, which is, what's your go-to recipe for a comfort food, like on a lazy Saturday afternoon?
So my girlfriend and I, we're not really into, we meal plan quite meticulously. So there usually isn't a day in the week where we don't know beforehand what we will have. But one of the recipes we often go back to is a gnocchi pan, if you will. So you need onions, gnocchi, zucchini, and canned tomatoes. And you just fry the onions, fry the gnocchi, fry the zucchini in that order. Put some canned tomatoes on top of that. That's a meal that is cooked fresh in under 15 minutes and is often our go-to if we are on holiday and short on time, just need a few ingredients that are basically available at every somewhat well-stocked supermarket.
Now, would you believe me if I told you that is one of my go-tos as well?
With those exact same ingredients?
Scratch the tomato from the can, instead olive oil, and you slow bake it and you do the Parmesan, and then when you plate it, I like to drizzle a balsamic glaze, just a little bit, not too much to overwhelm, but just to add that little bit of extra flavor on top. Yeah, it's one of my go-tos.
Yeah, it's super easy to make, it's filling, it's not too unhealthy, and perfect for a day where you're not in the mood for cooking.
Let's see what the next one we could probably go off of. Well, okay. It's about YouTube, but it's tangential. and you had mentioned it briefly earlier, which is instead of your content creation side, what about on consumption side? Is there any channel or person on YouTube that puts out a lot of content that you enjoy watching yourself?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think I mentioned Many a True Nerd earlier. That is probably my favorite channel for the last 2 or 3 years. I feel like we have a very similar taste in games. I'm not quite sure how many people are familiar with his Fallout You Only Live Once series. That is a challenge that is right up my alley. That is something that I could see myself do as well. Other than that, not too many channels that I really follow regularly. Christopher Art, I think, is good if you just want to experience freshly released games. He does a lot of walkthroughs. Still one of my go-to channels for XCOM content. Those are really the big two. Other than that, most of my YouTube consumption is basketball related or Critical Role, as I'm a huge D&D fan. And yes, I am one of those people who got into D&D thanks to Critical Role. And then, yeah, channels here and there for stuff like Rimworld, stuff like strategies for XCOM. Those are not channels that I watch everything they put out. I just search for a particular series, watch that, and then just to get an impression. I think for the Rimworld Ideology series, for example, I watched a few playthroughs of the game just to get a feel for it, because it actually took me quite some time to buy and try out the Ideology DLC for myself, because I was still doing other series on the channel and didn't really have time to play it myself. So that was kind of a way to familiarize myself with the new content without diving into it myself.
I still haven't dived into Ideology myself. It's I feel like every time there's another expansion in Rimworld, it's like, oh man, here we go again.
Exactly. That's why I'm hoping that they there is this theory that they do an expansion for every letter of the world Rimworld, and as much as I love the game and as much as the game has done for the channel, I honestly don't want to see that. Like, on the one hand, I would definitely like for there to always be more content to play with, but Ideology itself was quite the thing to get into, because the whole Ideology system with the memes and the precepts was pretty overwhelming at first. And I really had to force myself to keep that intro for the first series, for the first video in the new series, as short as possible. And even then it ended up being 10 to 12 minutes or something like that, because there's just so much explaining to do. And I think we'll spend quite a few more episodes explaining stuff. But that's the way things go. I'm not sure if they actually do that and release how many more, 5 or more episodes.
Expansions, and yeah. I had not heard of the theory that they were going to do one for every letter in the title being Rimworld.
Well, so far we had Royalty and Ideology.
Yeah. Wow. I am shocked I didn't put that together. Okay. But Steak is being persistent, perhaps, is the word I'll use here. But we should at least address the idea. The question being, any ideas for plans or possible community events, game nights, or competitions? And before you give your answer, from the administrative side, from what the staff has been doing, I can at least say we have lots of plans in place and are hoping that there will be many more events in the coming year of 2022. I don't know if you want to elaborate anything on that. I know some members of the Discord here, the Patreon members that join us here on Discord, we used to have a community D&D session, but after some complications, it fell apart. And the longer you don't play a D&D campaign, the less likely you are to come back to it. That's just the way D&D ends up working. But there's definite plans to bring more events. I don't know if you want to say anything else on that topic, though.
To be honest, I'm probably not familiar with everything you have or the ideas that the staff
There are
already
some
has.
that I haven't brought up with you yet. That is true.
That's fine. No, I would definitely like to do that. I think we already talked about playing games together. I wanted, back when the D&D sessions were a thing, I wanted to actually jump into one, but I think the timing also didn't really work for me. I believe we once had a Minecraft server here on the Discord, as well as a multiplayer Rimworld thing.
Cough, cough, not a officially sanctioned complete Minecraft server. I think I just want to put that disclaimer out there. I have no idea what those guys do on there, so
this is something, for those of you who are listening to this as we upload the video to YouTube, this is something that just happened organically out of the community, which is of course a great thing to see, that people are not on the Discord to just talk about me or wait for me to talk, but are actually engaging with each other, which is what you would like a community to develop into. But I never really participated in any of that, mostly because, again, time zones and Minecraft isn't really my thing, unfortunately. But yeah, I could definitely see us do community events in the future. I think from the logistics side, we would of course have to figure out how to keep it fair, how to involve people without systemically keeping certain people out.
No gatekeeping, so to speak.
Exactly, or always playing with the same people. But yeah, I could definitely see that be a thing in the next year.
Yeah, and as a little Easter egg, I guess, is the next event will be a competition, just like the previous competition that we had done, but it will be a little bit different. Still artistic in nature, but a little more open-ended, which should be lots of fun for those who are active in the art category on the Discord server here. So I hope that everyone enjoys that when January comes around. And of course, we'll make an announcement when that comes. But yeah, game nights would be fantastic. But as Pete pointed out, logistics and organization make things difficult, especially considering that all of us staff do this. You know, we do this out of the kindness of our own hearts. Like, we all support on Patreon, but we're not getting any like kickbacks or anything. We just spend our free time trying to organize things and do what we can just to help out, you know? So it takes time. It takes time.
Which, as you're saying this, maybe is a good time to thank each and every one of you for your contributions to this server, especially you who, back when we started this, kind of forced me to set things up, but who helped tremendously in getting me acquainted with Discord and how it works, and helped me a whole lot setting everything up. And
not a problem.
Even today, you are a big part of getting this AMA to work. And the fact that we are over 500 people on the Discord today is only manageable because of people like the moderating staff that we have, who do their best to keep everyone in check, which thankfully with a community like this is, at least the way I perceive it, not the hardest job in the world, because we have compared to others perhaps, a very mature audience here, who like to have fun, but who also respect the rules, who are kind to each other. And I very much appreciate that, both about the community that we were able to build here, but also about you guys who are moderating the entire Discord server. So thank you for that.
No, thank you. But let's steer it back towards some of the questions here. Is there a reason you haven't updated your Patreon goals?
Yeah, because I think the last actual goal I had was to be able to move one step closer towards doing this full time. And so logically, the next Patreon goal would probably be to do this full time. At least I don't want to mislead people by just having one goal after the other that just gets me incrementally closer to doing this full time without actually promising to do it full time. And at the moment, doing things full time, or doing YouTube full time, which I believe was actually a question that somebody also asked, is the fact that I'm still doing my PhD and I have no plans on stopping that or interrupting that, or it would be stupid to do so, to be honest. There are parts of the job that I really love and that I will probably still love in the future, 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now. So there currently is not a perspective for me to do this full time, at least until I have actually gotten my PhD, which is probably more realistically 3 years in the future. And even then, there are, again, certain things about working at the university that I really like, that I, if possible, don't want to give up. I really love teaching. I love research. I have some fantastic colleagues that are, of course, coming and going, as is the nature of things in science. And I don't want to give that up. And there is some interest from the university side as well. So if that is going to become a reality, that remains to be seen. University is a very fluent field of work where your job today could be totally different in a year from now. I am hoping to keep doing things the way I do them for 2 or 3 years at least, which does not mean, of course, that there isn't room for YouTube to take a larger role in my work life. There is always the option of reducing working hours at the university. But devoting 100% of my time to YouTube is probably not an option for at least a few more years.
Yeah, as I always say, real life comes first. So I understand that sentiment. Now, on the topic of research, Glamour had asked a question about how they noticed, and you had touched on this earlier, actually, when we were talking about the difference between a live stream perspective to the way that you create your content, which is they noticed a lot of research and planning goes in, and of course there's the how you make a video that you put up in early 2021, but they asked, what's your process on how you do research for the strategies that you find, hidden items and other components of a completionist run through? How often are you doing practice runs versus how often are you doing runs where you're just recording it and you're like, okay, this will be the final one? Or do you sometimes not know, is this the final run, and you're just going multiple takes? And they had another question, which we can get to later, though.
Okay, so yeah, that kind of depends, of course, on the game I play. So for a game like Mass Effect, for example, I definitely do practice runs. So what you see on screen is very often the 3rd or 4th attempt of me playing a section, because I record and re-record and re-record section after section until it is as smooth as possible. Because for a game like Mass Effect, which I don't find particularly difficult, I do not consider it to be the main challenge to go through the game without dying, for example. But my main ambition for that series is to make it as smooth as possible, which is a little different for a game like Rimworld, for example, or for the XCOM or Mutant Year Zero series, to name some of the more recent ones, where a permadeath run is very much one of the core challenges of those series. So in those series, I of course do not have the option to reload save files from earlier and try things out and stuff like that. So for those series, I can't do practice runs. I just can pause the game a lot and think about what I want to do next. So that is again why a live stream of me recording a Rimworld episode would probably not be overly entertaining, because for 1 hour of gameplay, I would probably at least have 2 hours of the game just being paused and me thinking about things, tabbing into the wiki and reading up on things, on mechanics and stuff like that. So that is, regardless of the game, though, that is one of the big things that I do. Read through the game's documentations for XCOM, or read through people's calculations of strategies, stuff like that. I was kind of proud of myself to be able to grasp the scope of the ideology DLC, for example, where I just locked myself into my office for a day and just researched ideology without probably touching the game for at least half a day. I just read up on stuff on ideology, made a big Excel spreadsheet on what the different memes and precepts do, what would be perhaps a little bit overpowered, what would fit the playstyle that I had in mind, stuff like that. So I do much more than to just hit the record button, think about a few things and add my voice lines to that. I do a whole lot of research beforehand that, of course, varies from game to game. But for those games that feature a permadeath challenge, like Rimworld, like XCOM, where I'm not able to reload earlier saves, most of those preparations are, in fact, just pausing the game, thinking about things, looking up things if I don't know the exact answer, or I'm not sure if I know it. And Not stuff like Mass Effect, where I don't want to call it save scumming, because it's not a permadeath run. It's just a run that is supposed to be as smooth as possible, showing off the most efficient strategy that is possible in the game.
Yeah. So there was another question there that I thought was interesting. It's somewhat related, but Glamour also wanted to know, what was your most difficult run? And I think maybe to expand on that, instead of just being like, okay, what was the most difficult run as in like a game, maybe there was something in Mass Effect which, while not necessarily, as you were pointing out, not necessarily like a permadeath situation, where it just, from a technical perspective, it was just so hard to actually pull off. Was there anything in any of the series that really strikes you as having been the most difficult to get completed in the optimal way for the intended purpose of use on your channel?
I think there are multiple answers to this question, probably. So from a pure gameplay standpoint, I think the XCOM series was probably the most difficult. And I will definitely admit that we had some amazing luck, especially in the early game, because in XCOM, the early game is usually the most difficult part of the game. If you're at a certain point, things get a lot easier. You have options. The most difficult thing is when you don't have a whole lot of tactical options, and it's just a test of how well you understand the gameplay mechanics versus the CPU. So that was definitely the hardest series for me to do, and I'm still surprised how well it actually went. I had not imagined that to be the case. And that is also the series that I think I saw that question as well, that I am most proud of editing-wise, because it was, of course, heavily edited at times to just kind of condense the missions that otherwise would have taken 40, 50 minutes unedited. And then there are, of course, missions in Mass Effect that are a little bit more challenging than the usual game. In Mass Effect 3, not so much, because with playing with an imported character from Mass Effect 2, I think, to be honest, that's Mass Effect 3 on easy mode. But I didn't want to do it any different, because we have played the first two games, and importing a character is just, in my opinion, the way to play that trilogy. So that is why Mass Effect 3 in particular at the moment is not overly difficult. But again, there are sections of the game or missions that are a bit more challenging. What is actually pretty challenging or interesting about Mass Effect is stuff like, so some of the behind the scenes stuff that you don't really get to see, stuff like mission order. Figuring out a pathway through the Citadel that includes talking to everyone who can be talked to at the moment without having to do too much backtracking. Or in a mission, like especially one of the main missions include a lot of ambient dialogue. Figuring out where ambient dialogue is triggered, because oftentimes it is triggered by you moving to a certain point in the mission. So to be able to go to point A, let the ambient dialogue play, and then proceed in a speed that still allows me to get my lines in before triggering the next set of ambient dialogue. That is sort of the editing related stuff that, yeah, again, normally you don't get to see, but that I do have, of course, planned out in advance. And that is a challenge of itself without necessarily making the game any more difficult. But the order in which we do side missions for a game like that, for example, or the order in which we visit maps in Mutant Year Zero, stuff like that is something that you need to figure out beforehand, because I don't want to play 2 or 3 episodes and then realize, oh, I've backed myself into a corner here, or I should have done that mission a little earlier for this and that reason. So yeah, that is the stuff that I have to plan out in advance, and that is a challenge that definitely exists, that is of course not so noticeable in the final videos.
Yeah, I honestly hadn't thought about that, but I had noticed in the Mass Effect videos I'm gonna be honest, actually, I didn't know that the ambient dialogue played as much of a role as I thought it did, as it does. So that was news to me. But I can't imagine trying to figure out where you need to go in like a streamlined fashion in order to trigger all the right dialogues without having to run back and forth. I already find when I play Mass Effect, it's like, okay, I run left and then I run right and then I run left again and then I'm like, ugh.
Definitely. And that is something that is also a little different in Mass Effect 3 because, at least for me, or in my experience, I did not feel like Mass Effect 1, for example, had that much ambient dialogue. Mass Effect 3, especially the main missions, are just filled with ambient dialogue. If I wanted to, I could probably play a mission. If you just sprint through everything, I wouldn't get a word in. So it would probably be the smoothest way to play the mission, but it would reduce the amount of commentary I could add by at least 50%. And of course, for recording purposes and for getting an episode up quickly, that does have its advantages. But generally, I do, of course, want to talk about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. So that is something that I have to get used to. That was actually also a challenge very, very early on when I launched the channel. Not quite sure how many of you have watched my Mirror's Edge series, the very first series I ever did, which also features an incredible amount of ambient dialogue, which makes the game a very immersive experience, but very hard to actually record audio for. Because you oftentimes end up having like these 7 to 8 seconds breaks in between ambient dialogue number 1 and in-game dialogue number 2. And now you have to add something worthwhile in 8 seconds. And you have to do that like 5 or 10 times before you get a longer break where you can talk a bit more. And splitting up your strategy or your explanations of strategy into such short chunks of commentary, that is definitely a challenge. And that was probably the hardest part about that series, looking back at it.
Mm-hmm. Well, switch to a question that seems to be getting a little bit of attention in the questions channel right now. I will ask you the original question and then we'll expand it. But who would win, in your mind, who would win in a fight between Steak and Cambiar? And then after that, let's throw specs in there and see if you have a thought on that process. But for Steak versus Cambiar, the benchmark should be when the series ended. If the two of them went head to head, who do you think would win?
I am honestly having a hard time thinking back to what Cambiar's final weapon loadout was, but considering the fact that Steak had psychic abilities, I would probably have to go with Steak.
Yeah.
Although character-wise, Cambiar is probably far more ruthless, so that might give him the advantage. But
as I take a sip from my nice to meet you cup.
Great way to plug the merchandise there. shop.petecomplete.com. No, but I would probably have to go with Steak. At the moment, of course, since Specs asked, in her current state, I would not see much of a chance for her. That could change very soon, as psychic abilities are definitely on the horizon for her. Maybe we'll see how she develops and what her final loadout will be. Character-wise, she definitely has she definitely has the right mindset, I would say, to compete with Cambiar. Maybe she's even worse. We'll see how that series develops, but. From the pure equipment standpoint or ability standpoint, I would have to go with Steak at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's probably accurate. Someone else was asking, Simple Man, beyond just featuring, I'm not going to ask the exact question, but beyond just featuring the fan art that you have shown on the channel, there's plenty of things you could use that for. Have you thought of, I don't know, asking them to, if you're allowed to use it more liberally in other places, whether it be merch as he was suggesting, or perhaps in other ways that I can't think of that would benefit the channel from your perspective?
For the most part, that would probably be merchandise. I think we took a small first step, if you will, with the thumbnail contest, which we had here over on Discord, where people were able to submit artwork that eventually ended up as the thumbnail for the series. And so the thumbnail that you are currently seeing for the Rimworld series is not made by me, but by fans. That would certainly be something that I could see myself do in the future. Featuring artwork or using artwork as merch designs, I'm a bit torn on that because I don't want to profit off of other people's designs. So one way I could see myself do that is, for example, as like a charity sale or something like that, where we use a design from the community, sell that, and all the profits go to a charity of the community's choice, for example. But there is the option definitely to collaborate a bit more closely with some of the artists, and you definitely have seen some recurring names over the first few episodes, and I have already received a bunch of emails for the next episode, which for those of you who watch this live, you will see tomorrow, and for those of you who watch this on YouTube, will probably already have seen. Yeah, I mean there are designs that probably lend themselves pretty well to be eventually to end up as a poster or stuff like that. But again, I'm a bit hesitant on that. I don't want to profit off of other people's works, and I would have to get in touch with some of the artists of those pieces and see if we can't work something out. But perhaps a charity sale or something like that would be a good way to do that without. I want these things to remain as like community submissions. I don't want anything to become a job or an obligation for people to submit fan art. So
avoid the corporate feeling.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes.
So Jai actually just mentioned something. Well, not a question. I thought it seems that a lot of people are reacting to it. The ticker keeps going up. He was saying, I'll just read it out loud in case you can't see, but he says, I've actually thought that a quick slideshow / collage recap of the character sheets at the end of each episode in regards to Rimworld would be really helpful. Would save skimming through them, hoping to find the panel open somewhere. In regards to you and myself not being able to remember what Cambiar's final loadout and stats were, but just in general, at the end of the episode, it seems like he's suggesting something along the lines of like, you know, here's where their stats line up as of right now. What do you think about that idea? I know that's an extra work, so to speak, but do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, recording wise, it's not much that would be easily done. I kind of want to implement that in the actual gameplay as much as possible, because I don't want to open myself up to criticism, if you will, that the actual gameplay portion of the episode is getting shorter and shorter, with like a 20-minute episodes now featuring 2 minutes of fan art and 1 minute of character sheet slideshow and then 30 seconds of intro. And at some point, you need to have some gameplay. I try to show the character sheets, especially the stats section, whenever someone does a job that is related to one of their core skills. So, for example, in the current series, whenever Maniac is mining, for example, he has a pretty high mining skill, or at least double passion in the mining skill. That is something that I would like to keep an eye on. Again, I don't want to spoil anything for the next episode, but there might be a situation coming up regarding the cooking skill, where I show that off, and I hope that is enough to kind of keep that in the gameplay portion
in a more organic way, rather than just like list it off.
Yes, and someone has asked me, actually someone who is also submitting fan art has asked me to show the social tab a bit more often, because in the social tab it of course lists what the actual topics of conversations are between the colonists. But again, you're getting from one point to the next, and then you're just showing off tab after tab. It's kind of difficult to keep a balance between showing off all of these things and keeping the gameplay somewhat immersive. But I will definitely take that feedback to heart and try to show off as much as I can in the next, or for those of you listening live, in the second or to next episode, I have just actually finished recording the footage for the next episode that will go up tomorrow.
Sounds good. Cool. So let's we can take another step back here. This is somewhat, while Steak did ask this. This is I recall vividly that this was discussed in the last AMA, but as you mentioned in the beginning here, the community has grown so much, and with all the new faces, it might be worth revisiting this question, which is video games that you grew up with. What about games that you just like they've stuck with you since you played them as a kid?
There aren't that many, to be honest, but so one of the first video games I ever played was the Settlers 3. I'm not quite sure how popular the Settlers series is outside of Germany, as it is a German production, but it is one of those RTS games that is very popular here in Germany, and the Settlers 3 and 4 especially are considered as some of the best installments in that series. And Settlers 3 was really my first video game that I played for hours and hours. So that is something that I definitely grew up on, but a game that I don't really visit or revisit too much. I think probably the game that I revisit the most, and that is still my favorite game of all time, and also quite old at this point, is Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. I think I've mentioned that in every AMA or Q&A up until this point. That was one of the games that I played a lot as a teenager, and still consider one of the best video games ever made. And I'm very much looking forward to the remake that is apparently coming.
Yeah,
soon,
I was gonna say
not so soon. We'll see, but that's definitely one of those games that shaped my experience with video games, and one of the main reasons why games like Mass Effect or Dragon Age Origins, all of those good old BioWare games, are still among my favorites today.
Yeah, so that was actually something that I had been thinking about, but since you brought it up, do you think that Star Wars Knights game would be something that you would want to put up on the channel? Or do you think simply because of its nature, since it is a remake, not a another one in addition, it's just going to be the same game remade, from what I understand at least. I could be totally wrong. But do you think that's something you want to enjoy on your own, or something that you would like to turn into a series?
I think that would definitely be a candidate for a series, because, of course, it depends a lot on what they actually end up doing with the series. There have been remakes in the past where people are mostly in agreement that the original is far better. I hope that is not going to be the case for that KOTOR remake, but it could be. But that is definitely something that I'm keeping my eye on, and also a reason why, as much as I would like to play Knights of the Old Republic immediately after Mass Effect 3, because it is in the same realm, it is a BioWare role-playing game, I would probably hold off on that until the remake is released and I can get a bit of a clearer picture of whether or not that remake is worth playing on the channel. But to be transparent with you, that is definitely at the top of my list, and I would really like to play that. The question is if they keep most of what the game actually had, or what made the game unique, or what made the game my favorite game of all time, which is the storytelling, which is the somewhat Dungeons and Dragons-ish combat mechanics, stuff like that. I could see them simplify or take out or remove entirely, or at least replace for the remake. We'll see. But that is stuff that, of course, adds to the strategicness of that game, and that I could definitely see be a huge appeal for me as a more strategic gamer, if you will. So I had KOTOR on my list of games to play basically since the beginning of the channel. So it was actually a toss-up between Knights of the Old Republic and Mass Effect for the first series of the channel. And it ended up being Mass Effect, also because Knights of the Old Republic is a game that features even more dialogue than the Mass Effect series, which can at times be pretty tedious. Even if the protagonist is not voiced like Shepard is, you definitely have those 10 to 15 to 20 minute sections where there's just dialogue, and sometimes dialogue that is not much more than just a lore dump. And I imagine that as a player, that is not much of an issue, but for someone who is viewing episode after episode, that can be tedious at times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's, and a little bit tangential to this, I would really hope that it turns out to be a good remake, not where the original is viewed as better, because there's a lot of people, here listening live at the AMA, who I'm willing to bet have either not heard of or never had the chance to play KOTOR. And it's just such a phenomenal game. It would be fantastic if it were to come back out. But let's move to another question, which actually was just asked by Liviana that I think is really good. We had discussed books earlier on, but actually it was the first question, wasn't it? Are there any things that you've been enjoying lately, such as podcasts, TV? We already touched on books, but there was some discussion in the server about Arcane, the new Netflix show for related to League of Legends. Is there anything that you've sunk your teeth into, so to speak, recently that you're really enjoying?
To be honest, like I said, watching Critical Role every week is already a huge time commitment, or if you have other things going on as well. So those 4 hours every week definitely are noticeable compared to a 20 or even a 45-minute TV show. I imagine we all have those series that we put on as if we just need like 20 or 25 minutes of entertainment. I have actually gotten around to finally watching It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia for the first time, which was not as big of a thing in Germany as it may have been in the US. And I've binged the first 6 seasons fairly quickly lately. And I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, and I imagine it's a pretty popular choice, especially for those US viewers or listeners. But that is probably the one thing that I have gotten into recently. Other than that, I'm very excited for the new Witcher season that I think released yesterday on Netflix, at least in Germany. I'm excited to see which elements of the books they implement or incorporate into that series. And I'll probably watch 1 or 2 episodes after the AMA. And I'm very, very eager to see what they did with it.
Yeah, I'm very excited to watch that myself as well. I haven't had the time yet, but definitely looking forward to that. Henry Cavill does a phenomenal job as Geralt. Yeah, I can imagine as well spending, what it's like 4, sometimes more hours watching a Critical Role. That's practically like playing D&D once every week.
Yeah, which I also do, or will start doing in the new year as well, because thanks to Critical Role, I have gotten a few friends around to try out D&D for the first time, which of course ends up or leads to me being the the dungeon master forever. But
oh, no.
I'm fine. I mean, if you want to get people to try D&D, you have to DM for them.
I know. It's the way it works.
It is. But I'm happy in that role, and I'm very excited for a new campaign that we will be launching hopefully sometime in January. But that's enough D&D for me, at least in 1 week or in 2 weeks or however often we're going to play. So I'm actually very happy that Critical Role has decided to take, I believe, every 4th Thursday off or something like that. Again, I don't want to go too much into detail about Critical Role here, but I think watching Critical Role for 4 hours every week, even with 1 week off, that is a time commitment that is definitely noticeable and reduces the amount of time you have for consuming other media content.
I Oh, yeah, completely off topic. Someone had asked favorite potato chip / crisp flavors.
Okay, I don't want to offend those Germans who think that we have a good potato chip culture, but compared to the US, we probably don't. There is a trend in Germany at the moment making chips or crisps, whatever you want to call them, out of lentils. Which are much higher in protein. It's branded as a healthy alternative to the potato chip. Of course, it's not healthy, but there are certain flavors that I really like, and that has been my go-to snack in the chip crisp direction, if you will. But I don't consume that much. I'm more of a sweets guy. You get me more with chocolate, be it ice cream or the regular kind.
So, in regards to the first series that you put up, what was it that really pushed you to make the jump to post your first series? Was it just, hey, let's see if people like this? Or was there other intent behind it? Like, hey, there's not a lot of completionist content for the games that you wanted to see completionist content for. So you figured, well, be the change you want to see or want to be. I don't remember what the saying is, but was it just pure happenstance or extra motivation? What was
no,
it?
It was definitely the way I like to put it. It was a lot of intent, and for a long time, not a lot of action. Exactly as you put it, basically. I always wanted to have a channel on YouTube, whether it be mine or someone else's, that featured completionist content, more or less the way I make it today. And I couldn't find that. I could find that sporadically for certain games or certain series, but those more often than not were channels devoted to a particular game or genre. And I didn't really want to do that. I, to this day, don't consider myself a Rimworld Let's Player, for example. Or back in the day when I did NBA 2K, I was, I think, on the brink of becoming an NBA 2K YouTuber, which was very far away from what I actually wanted to be. So it was, that was basically the main motivation behind launching the channel. With that being said, again, there was a whole lot of intention and not a lot of actual content for a long time. If you go to my channel, you can actually see that I launched this or started this YouTube channel back in 2014. So the channel was registered with YouTube with the sole intent of becoming my content creation YouTube channel and not the channel that I use to consume other people's content. So I registered the name Pete Complete with YouTube in late or early 2014. I don't quite remember. As you can see, it took me until March of 2016 to actually post my first video. And that is kind of symptomatic, if you will, for the way I do YouTube or the way I approach making YouTube videos. I think and rethink, I plan and replan, I strategize probably too much. If I could go back to that first series, I would probably do it 1 year earlier, because let's be real, the best advice you can give someone who's trying to start out on YouTube is to just go ahead and do it and not overthink it, which is exactly what I did for more than a year. And then eventually I posted that Mirror's Edge series, which is also interesting in of itself, because I actually wanted to have the entire Mirror's Edge series finished before launching the channel. So I think I released the videos after launching the channel, but I had all of those videos ready to go the day I made the channel public and published, I believe, the first episode of Sims Sunday and then Mass Effect afterwards. So yeah, I did a whole lot of over planning on that end. Came up with the name Pete Complete actually pretty quickly. But the motivation behind it definitely was to make a channel that features this well thought out completionist content that also features explanation of why I do things the way I do them, somebody who does not talk over cutscenes, somebody who does not cut out important content. So to give that full completionist experience and to enable people to follow along if they want to.
Yeah. There was another question, one that I actually kind of wanted to ask. And now that we've covered a lot of other people's questions, not afraid to pick my own, which is, would you ever consider doing a completionist run-through, a completionist lasso run-through of Halo? And if you don't know what lasso is, I can explain that. Considering that it's now on PC with the Master Chief Collection and Infinite has just come out, and there's some discussion that Infinite's supposed to be the last Halo, that they just keep updating and releasing stuff for it. But is that something that you ever would see fitting in on the channel, considering the nature of a lasso run-through being, well, as difficult as it is?
Honestly, I have no idea what a lasso playthrough is, because I was never a console kid. So very early on, I got my first computer because my father gave me a discarded office PC, basically. And I never had a games console. So there are many of those Xbox and PlayStation exclusives that I have no or very little experience with, Halo included. So
I see.
I know that the game is absolutely pivotal for video game history, and for FPS games it was a milestone probably, but I have basically no relation to the Halo series at all.
Just saying, the first Halo was also made for computers, but understandable because Microsoft quickly tied it to the Xbox as its flagship title. Lasso just means all legendary, all skulls on, and legendary is the hardest difficulty. Skulls are difficulty multipliers, so that it just makes it very difficult. It's like playing Mass Effect on legendary. See the similarity in name there. But anyway, that's something that you actually had discussed in the previous AMA about your father having given you an old PC and not going through the whole console to PC, just jumping straight in on PC when you were younger. So it was something that I thought of, but didn't think much merit for. There was something someone else whose name on Discord I cannot pronounce. I don't know what it is, but they said, since you're German but you speak English in your videos and in the AMA right here on Discord, what language do you play other games in, like apart from YouTube? I assume if there's a localized version, you'd probably be playing games in German. Because you're playing them for yourself.
No, not at all.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, honestly, I consume more or less all of my media for at least 10 to 15 years now, entirely in English. Because most of the time, the localized versions with the German synchronization are cringeworthy at best and horrible at their worst. Of course, there are exceptions to that, but once you go to the originals and once you listen to the original voice acting for many games, the German voice acting just pales in comparison. And that goes especially for movies. I often find myself cringing especially at fantasy narration in Germany or in German. So stuff like that. I regularly get offended when people suggest watching a new release in the cinema in Germany and to not watch the original version in English. Once you grow accustomed to consuming media in English, at least for me, it is very hard to go back. So no, I consume pretty much everything I can in English, unless it is a German production for which there is no English version available. But that is very rare.
Well, there's a follow-up question here from ASM. For media originally created in German, do you still go with the English version?
No. I honestly can't name an example off the top of my head of any content originally created in German for which there is an English version that I would even have the option to listen to. There are, of course, a few podcasts that I listen to in German, but obviously they don't have an English version for that. But no, for video games and TV series and movies and stuff like that, I listen to most of that, if not all of that, in English.
All right. So there's an odd question here, but I thought it was kind of fun. Romzatron? Yeah. Wants to know what your second favorite color is. Not your first favorite color. Your second favorite color.
That's difficult. It's a boring answer, but probably red.
Okay.
So
right, yeah.
very obviously, green is my favorite color. But instinctively, I would say red.
Okay. Yeah. And Steak just asked a question, which was assuming, because you had discussed your studies and also being able to teach, but if you could move to any place while keeping your job, your living standards, and all of that, but if nothing were to change, it's just the location, where would you move?
That's actually a super interesting question because, believe it or not, I have semi-seriously thought about doing something like that. As YouTube does, of course, if I were to do only YouTube, does, of course, allow me to pursue something like that. Because where I am does not really matter in terms of if I'm able to upload videos. I just would have to keep my PC with me, and that's it. So I have actually thought about that, kind of jokingly researched some of the more obscure places that you could go to, like Greenland, for example, which, spoiler alert, is not that interesting. Sorry to everyone listening from Greenland. No, Iceland, for example, is an interesting place. As a German, Scandinavia is very appealing to me. The US would be interesting, stuff like that. Yeah, this is actually a question that has come up in the past. And would I not have a job here, a family here, a girlfriend here, my sports team here, that I would definitely be open to seriously consider. Maybe in the future I will actually do that. And probably, yeah, a place like Sweden, Norway, Finland, so Scandinavia, even though Finland technically is not part of Scandinavia, that would be something to consider.
Cheap Milk had a question that he wanted to ask, which was, if you had a VR headset, would you do a completionist run of Half-Life Alyx?
I'm not so sure. I've tried a VR headset with Elite Dangerous, I think, and I actually got motion sick pretty quickly, which kept me from experimenting with VR for the rest of my life, basically. But I also understand that the technology has progressed somewhat and that it has probably gotten a little bit more stable. And that brings me to the second part of the question, that I don't really have a whole lot of connection with the Half-Life series, which I know is pretty much blasphemy for somebody playing video games on PC. But I think the first Half-Life just released a few years too early for me. My connection with the series, by proxy, if you will, was more through Counter-Strike, but Half-Life itself was never really a thing for me. So the series itself does not really have that much of an appeal, if you will.
Yeah.
But playing something in VR definitely does, and I've participated in a VR escape room a few years ago, which was pretty fantastic, being in a virtual space with other people and being able to interact with them. So that is definitely something that I find interesting. But overall, the entire VR genre has not really been super appealing to me, and the same goes for the Half-Life series.
Oh, if I could have a VR headset, I'd play it, but those things get expensive. There's another sort of odd but fun, lighthearted question. You prefer shorts or do you prefer pants?
I prefer pants.
Gotcha. Okay. Simple. Easy. And someone had asked something along the lines of spirit animal. I know there was another question, which is, what is your favorite animal? So one person wanted to know what your favorite animal is. I don't think it necessarily has to be a pet, but what your favorite animal. And then Liviana, I think, wanted to know what your spirit animal is, such that, like, an animal you relate to.
So my favorite animal is probably the monkey. For basically my entire childhood, I always wanted to be a zookeeper when I grew up, which is also translating into video games. One of the reasons why I really love the Zoo Tycoon series and want to find a way to somehow incorporate that on the channel in the maybe more distant future. Anyway, so I always wanted to be a zookeeper because I loved monkeys. And I still find monkeys fascinating, of course, because they are the animal that is probably most similar to the human. They are not my spirit animal, though. I think they are a bit too active for that. People have said that my spirit animal could very well be the sloth, not because I'm lazy necessarily, but because I like to sleep a lot. I'm one of those people who definitely needs their 9 to 10 hours of sleep every night. Otherwise, I'm not really functioning on the next day. And considering the fact that I often stay up late, also for YouTube purposes, because let's face it, large parts of the audience are from the US, and releasing videos too early is probably not a good idea with so many people having a different schedule or living in different time zones. I often go to bed very late at night and then sleep until the late morning or the early noon. I have been criticized for that in the past and compared to animals like that. So I would probably go with some of those animals like the sloth as my spirit animal.
Okay, cool. Well, as we're getting close to the 2-hour mark here, there's just a few more questions. And if anyone listening along live wants to shout out a question that they maybe posted and we didn't get to, or something that they've just thought of, go ahead and post them in the questions chat so that we can try and get to them if possible. But there is one question here that sort of relates to the what we were previously discussing, and you were talking about Zoo Tycoon. ASM said, we've seen very different cases from games that have a clear path to 100% completion, like Mirror's Edge or Mass Effect. But we've also seen a lot of more open-ended games, XCOM, Rimworld. They don't really have a built-in completion meter, so to speak. And it can be a circuitous route that gets there, or maybe it's in the case of something like Zoo Tycoon, where it's sort of like, how do you even run a completionist game, like series about that, which could be that you don't have an answer to this, but how do you find out what a good candidate to turn into a series would be, especially when it's more nebulous and less like, all right, here's the path, stick to the path, follow the path, make sure you get every collectible along the way?
Yeah, I have those completionist criteria, which is usually how I decide which games to play, which is kind of interesting because from day one, basically, the more successful series on the channel in their respective time periods were, interestingly enough, most of the time, those games that did not lend themselves particularly well to a completionist series. So we started things off with Mirror's Edge, The Sims 3, and Mass Effect. And while Mirror's Edge was the perfect candidate for a completionist playthrough with a fairly linear storyline, achievements, and all that, and actually being pretty difficult on the hardest difficulty setting if you also still want to go for all achievements, the most popular series in the beginning of the channel was The Sims 3, which, exactly as you said, does not have a defined ending, does not have a linear path to full completion. And that, translated then through the NBA 2K series, which at times was the most popular series on the channel, which again is a sports game that does not really have a defined path to full completion. And nowadays, very obviously, Rimworld is the most popular series on the channel, which again is not a series that you technically complete. And still I want to maintain that completionist aspect of the channel, which is why I really liked, for example, the Mutant Year Zero series, because even though there are, of course, in every encounter in that game, different ways to tackle things or different ways to engage the enemies, at the end of the day, there is a difficulty setting that gives you a challenge, and there are achievements that kind of plot the course to full completion. There is a defined ending in the game's storyline, much like there is in the Mass Effect series. And so from a completionist standpoint, that was actually one of the favorite games in recent memory on the channel. We actually also played the Portal series. I think it was just 2 or 3 episodes long, but again, that was a perfect candidate for full completion. You go in, you complete the game on its hardest difficulty setting, which Portal doesn't really have, I believe, unlock all achievements along the way, and you basically end up having the perfect playthrough, if you will. And even though a game like XCOM is a bit more open-ended with many choices to make, all of those choices eventually also factor in to that full completion, because there are certain achievements in the game that require a whole lot of long-term planning, which, like I said earlier, is a core challenge in many of my playthroughs that you don't get to see. So I would say XCOM is in that same category as Mutant Year Zero, even though the game is not as linear and definitely not as easy, which is also why I would really like to play XCOM 2 in the future, going into another question that has, I believe, popped up a few times. XCOM 2 will definitely happen, and while I don't want to promise that it's going to happen in the next year, I am like 95% sure that it will.
You heard it here first, folks. Confirmed 2022 XCOM 2. Just kidding. ASM brought something up that, what's your opinion on achievements that are like, achievements that restrict you to play a certain way and might make it so that you like aren't able to get other achievements? It essentially locks you into a certain way of playing that limits your ability. What's your opinion on achievements like that?
So apart from people leaving comments like things you missed X and Y, that is the second most frustrating thing about being a completionist YouTuber, are definitely achievements that are mutually exclusive, or achievements that require multiple playthroughs. Like, for example, in XCOM 1, where you have an achievement for winning the game from each of the 5 starting continents. So you have to complete the game 5 times to get all of those achievements. And the achievement that ASM alluded to, finishing XCOM 2 before a certain date, that would probably be, I just recently read through the list of achievements for XCOM 2, that would probably one of the few achievements that I would not go after in a playthrough like that, because it so heavily restricts the way the game can be played. And I think there is an achievement in XCOM 1 that I also did not go after that rewards you for completing the game without ever increasing your squad size. There is definitely a huge challenge to those achievements, but I feel they also kind of conflict with my ambition, if you will, to show off as much of a game as possible. So I always have to balance these two elements. On one hand, unlocking everything there is to unlock, and on the other hand, showing off as much of the game as possible so that people who watch the series don't get the feeling that they miss out on stuff. There are definitely achievements in games that limit the way that you can play, and that at times so heavily restrict you in what you can do that you don't get to show off everything. Another good example would probably be the Dishonored series, where you can and do a more or less pacifist run of the game. But honestly, 90% of the most fun abilities in Dishonored are abilities that you can't use in a playthrough like that. And since that game is also on the back end of my longer list of games that I eventually want to play, that is something that you always have to kind of negotiate with yourself. Do I want to lean more heavily into the achievements, or do I want to unlock everything there is to unlock, or do I want to get people to experience as much of the game as possible? And for an achievement like the one in XCOM 2, where you have to finish the game before a certain date, I would definitely not go after that, simply because it would just mean that we would have to leave, I don't know, at least half or even more of the research projects be, and people watching that series would leave the series having experienced maybe half of what the game actually has to offer. And that is something that I don't want.
I see. On the topic of achievements, Unexpected Giraffe wanted to know what was the hardest achievement that you had to figure out across all the games you've played.
I think the hardest achievement to get, I think there was one in XCOM where you had to take a soldier on every mission, which in itself is, of course, sounds fairly easy, because the only thing you have to do is to keep them alive. Which, again, after you have completed the early game, is, I don't want to say easy, but manageable. And that achievement is often regarded as mutually exclusive with some of the other achievements that also require you to field a squad consisting only of mech troopers or only of psionic soldiers. And that achievement definitely required a lot of planning to have a soldier who at the respective time in the series fulfilled all the necessary criteria so that they could be taken on every mission without voiding those other achievements. I think that was the hardest achievement for me to figure out, to plan for. I believe I had like a full page of notes on what to account for to be able to get that achievement without sacrificing others in the process. Because those are, regarding those mutually exclusive achievements, those are, to me, the best achievements out there that on the surface seem mutually exclusive, but actually aren't. That require extensive planning and where you can then actually surprise the audience who may have expected that achievement X and Y are mutually exclusive, and show them a way how you can unlock both of those achievements in the same playthrough.
Yes. So it's something that I had been curious about. I always sort of view Rimworld and Factorio in a similar light. It's not necessarily like, it doesn't exactly fit the guide of like, well, actually, I'll just put it this way. Do you ever think about Factorio or maybe Satisfactory as games that would have a good potential for a series?
Definitely. But mostly from the audience standpoint. So I know for a fact that especially Factorio has been requested numerous times over the last 2 or 3 years. More or less since I've started playing Rimworld, people have been requesting Factorio. I have to admit, I am personally, and I know this will probably offend people even, I'm not the biggest fan of Factorio, simply because I'm not so sure how it would actually end up being as a series. Like I can see people who enjoy Rimworld also enjoy the managing aspect of a game like Factorio or of other management simulating games. But I'm not so sure if this is a game that I would be able to add a whole lot to with my commentary. I know other YouTubers are able to, and there are good Factorio series out there. Not quite sure if I would be able to make one. And I know there are people out there that say, of course you can, but it's a game that I never really got into as much as the community perhaps did. So, I don't want to disappoint the expectations of people who are much more into the game than I am. And obviously I don't want to play a game just because people request it, as that might be fun for the first few series with people finally getting their wish of a Factorio series on the channel. But at the end of the day, I need to enjoy the games I play as well. And I am afraid that for a game like Factorio, that might not be the game to enjoy for 20, 30 episodes. At least that is my first impression of the game.
All right. And there was I thought a fairly fun question that Wicked Plays asked ahead of time, which was, which Mutant Year Zero catchphrase is your favorite?
So we might have to censor this, but I'm very keen on the "I'm Bormin, bitch" line from Bormin. Not so much of a fan of the Pharaoh voice lines, which, especially since we used Pharaoh so much, did kind of overextend their welcome, I feel. Although Pharaoh, and I think this was the second half of the question, is my favorite character in the game, but Bormin, at the end of the day, has the best lines. He is the narrating character for the series. Definitely has a special place in my heart for that series. All right. Well,
since we were kind of shooting for a 2-hour mark, I think this is a good spot to wrap it up. I guess the last little bit would be if there's anything that you want to close out the AMA with. As we saw last time we did an AMA, this could go on for several more hours, but as this is also being recorded, we need to temper some things down and make sure we don't go on for too long. But there'll be more in the future, I'm sure, along with all the other things that we have planned for the Discord server for the Patreon supporters.
Nothing more from my part. Honestly, first and foremost, thank you so much for agreeing to co-host this thing with me. For me personally, it was not to say that I did not enjoy the last AMA, but this was far more enjoyable for me to just be able to kind of sit back read through the AMA text, not have too many unnecessary pauses in the AMA. So thank you for helping out and structuring this for the community. I definitely plan on doing this far more frequently. I think once or twice a year is a good frequency, perhaps. Also a reason why we're not overextending our welcome here, so that we still have some questions to ask next time. But yeah, first and foremost, thank you to SquaredCubed. Thank you to all the moderating staff who have been preparing questions, have been collecting questions, have been keeping the Discord channel in check. And thank you all for listening, being with us live here. And for those of you who listen later while the video is on YouTube, thank you all so much for supporting the channel. So thank you everyone for participating, and to those of you listening live, you will probably see me again tomorrow in the latest Rimworld episode. Until then, see you next time. Thank you all for watching. Cheers and goodbye.